one thing about him is that he always tries to do what's right. Like, even he doesn't really take sides, in the sense that when he feels like his government, the US military or SHIELD or whoever is his boss, isn't doing things right, he will leave them. And that's kind of the conflict of Civil War. Even a little bit in Winter Soldier, of the people he thought were on his side actually aren't. So he's willing to ditch everything for his moral code. And that's what makes him attractive in his own sense. And then I didn't mean attractive as in Chris Evans is fit and handsome.
I mean...
Hello there.
Don't have a good day. Have a great day.
Talk to me, Goose.
I'm gonna steal the Declaration of Independence.
Why so serious?
World!
I could do this all day.
Are you watching closely?
Welcome, everybody, to the One Eyed Film Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Mossberg, and today I got Zach with me. We're going to be talking about Captain America and how he is, here's the title that I think the audience has already seen, Holiest Hero. What do you think of that?
Interesting.
Captain America, and we'll get into it in a lot more depth, but to give you the premise, Captain America is one of those characters who has the moral code that we are attracted to, whereas Iron Man it kind of found his way and learned from his mistakes. Captain America is already good. And that's kind of the moral conversation from the first Avenger movie, is just, I need a good man. And we can talk about that more, but that is Steve Rogers, a good man. And that's why I'm titling this episode A Holy Hero. I know it's a little bit clickbaity, but I like it.
Yeah, I think some of the best heroes, just kind of their motives and who they are, can be summed up in one word. Like for Batman, it's vengeance. Superman is hope. Spider-Man's responsibility. I would say Iron Man's redemption. And it took me I was thinking about this today, and I think the word that I would do for Captain America is loyalty. I think that's kind of his number one principle. What do you think about that?
What is he loyal to?
His principles, and kind of a little guy, I would say, too, and just people in general.
I would say, you said the word principles. I would say his word might be principle. Out of principle, he will do this. And that's his version of good and true. Like, we as Christians have that understanding of truth and goodness and beauty, and what the moral truth is that is written on each of our hearts by our Creator. If, again, fictitious character, if Steve Rogers were to be a real person, he would have that same moral code written on his heart. He just doesn't attribute it to the God of the Bible that we believe in. So that's why in his worldview, I would say it's probably principle or something along those lines. It is interesting to have a character who is morally good, and you can always bet on him to make the right decision, to not have the basis of the gospel and Jesus. The closest we get, I suppose, is one of my favorite lines from the Avengers movie, the first one, where he says,
"There's only one God, man, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't dress like that."
That gives us a little hint. I mean, he's from he grew up in the 30s and 40s, so that it was kind of the Bible thumper preacher at the pulpit type of era where everyone was a Christian. You had some sort of foundation in the Bible. And so we can assume that he was a part of that. Doesn't seem like he's a practicing Christian at all, but that's the standard of moral good. And I think that line that's played for laughs is actually very important to his character, to understand that may be where he actually gets his goodness from, his moral accuracy. And again, maybe he doesn't attribute that to the Bible, but that seems to be a good middle ground, I guess. Like, if he's good and we understand good, then we can understand that he might have that foundation.
The creator of Captain America, Jack Kirby, was Jewish, and I think, him and Stan Lee are responsible for most of Marvel's characters. So a lot of the Marvel characters we see kind of upheld these values in a sense, and I think we see that the most in Captain America and probably Spider-Man too, I would say. But we see kind of Captain America as a figure and a representation of these values.
What would you say that Captain America's weakness is? Because every good superhero has one, whether it's kryptonite or the humanity of being human. Like, I think Iron Man, like he suffers from PTSD and just the limitations of being human. Captain Marvel doesn't suffer from anything except masculinity and the patriarchy. Those are her weaknesses. What is Captain America's weakness?
I would say his weakness is the gray, if that makes sense. In the sense...
Oh, I get it.
Yeah, he's got this quote from Winter Soldier where he says,
For as long as I can remember, I just wanted to do what was right. I Guess I'm not quite sure what that is anymore.
I think when he doesn't know what right is, that's his weakness. You know, we see that through Winter Soldier and Civil War. He's just conflicted and split apart the whole time. And he's trying to do his best to kind of continue to uphold these moral values, but it's really hard to see what those are.
That's a good point. Like his own morality, the thing that makes him the superhero outside of the super serum is also his weakness. It's a double-edged sword. One thing about him is that he always tries to do what's right. Like even he doesn't really take sides in the sense that when he feels like his government, the US military or SHIELD or whoever is his boss, isn't doing things right, he will leave them. And that's kind of the conflict of Civil War. Even a little bit in Winter Soldier of the people he thought were on his side actually aren't. So he's willing to ditch everything for his moral code. And that's what makes him attractive in his own sense. And then I didn't mean attractive as in Chris Evans is fit and handsome.
I mean,
I think a lot of people will attribute why they like Captain America to how buff he is, and Chris Evans has done great to be a big guy and build muscle and all that. But the character he plays, I think, is way more important to who Steve Rogers is. And you see that before he gets the super soldier serum, the weird and actually not so weird CGI. I think people attribute weird CGI in the first Avenger to having a concept of what Chris Evans looks like now and what he'll look like for the rest of the movie. I think it looks really good. Head replacement can be pretty difficult, but they did it really well for the time, for the year that it came out. It's just an uncanny valley not in the sense that it was bad, like you would attribute most uncanny valleys to, but just that you think Chris Evans should be bigger and he's not. And that was whatever.
It was better than Black Adam.
For
you
sure.
Remember when they put Dwayne Johnson's head on the little guy?
Yeah, that was,
That didn't work
I
out
don't
so
know.
well.
I think it was similar. It did have a little bit more floating in, but then again, that came out like 15 years after the first Avenger. Like they had time to improve it and they didn't really. But besides that, Steve Rogers shows that he's a good man before he gets the super soldier serum. And that's the moral conflict in the first Avenger, where Erskine is trying to find the perfect candidate and the general is all about pick that guy. He's the buff one. And Erskine is like, I need a good man.
Whatever happens tomorrow, you must promise me one thing. That you will stay who you are. Not a perfect soldier, but a good man.
Yeah, it's not about being a perfect soldier or being the one who looks the best. That plays into the prophet Samuel back in the Old Testament trying to find a new king to replace Saul. He goes to Jesse's sons and is like, man, this guy looks the part. He looks like he could be a king. And God says, nope, I can see his heart. He's not fit. He will not lead well. And he does that for all of Jesse's sons. And he finally gets to David, who's out in the field. He's not even with his family. I don't know if that was because of his father's orders or just because he would rather be in the peace of the field with his sheep than in the craziness of the city or the town, wherever in Bethlehem. And more than that, David was a man after God's own heart. And actually, I want to share one of my favorite musical soundtracks, and this didn't make it into the best soundtracks episode, but one of the musicals that I was able to see a number of years ago, and I still listen to the soundtrack over and over again, is the David musical from Sight and Sound Theater. It has some great versions of Psalms put to song. It also it tells a great story of David and Saul as well. My sister actually got to intern down at Sight and Sound for their Esther production this summer, which was great. That was an experience for her. But for the David production, it showed the differences between Saul, and when he messed up, he would hold tighter to the crown to be king. He didn't want to let that go, no matter how much he messed up or how many problems were around him. He needed to be king. And when David messed up, he immediately let that crown go and said, I feel like I've tarnished this crown, is what one of his lines. And that's just the humility where, yes, he's going to mess up. A man after God's own heart does not mean he's perfect. It just means that he's flawed, and yet his heart is the right direction to say, God, forgive me. And that's what made David a great king. Coming back to Captain America.
That was a great analogy. I really like that.
Yeah, I love that show, man. All of the Sight and Sound stuff is amazing. Back to Captain America. He is also the humble nature for a person, for a character. He did not like being the show face. I don't know a better way to say that, for the army. He didn't want to be an actor. And honestly, who made that call? Who decided that they were going to give a guy super soldier serum and he was super strong, stronger than anyone could ever be, and put him on a stage? That's good for the story, but it doesn't make any sense. Like, why did they do that? Anyways,
well, I think the
ahead.
plan was to make more super soldiers, so they didn't want to lose their one guy after they lost the serum. So then the one guy was like, "Hey, I got something you can do." So and that's why he was dancing. So
well, his going rogue was, even, I guess I was attributing his, when things don't go right with the people he's working with, that he goes does what is right on his own. I connected that with like Winter Soldier when S.H.I.E.L.D. was being infiltrated and hacked or whatever. It actually happens in the first Avenger where they're telling him, you need to be on stage, you need to do this many shows, and he's like, I can't do this, I am better utilized out in the field, let me go save these men. And so he does that, and then he becomes a war hero. But yeah, he's keen on doing, he's not even keen on doing good, he just does good. And like I said before, you never question that he's going to make the wrong move, except, I wanted to bring this up, except for one comic run where he's actually a Hydra agent and he says Hail Hydra, and that blew people's minds. But I think that's a rare example of doing a plot twist that no one expects, because that's his characters, to do good and not to be on the wrong side of the equation.
You know, he's not looking out for himself, he's looking out for everyone, and it was easy for him to do that for a while, his country and the government, because he saw that they were looking out for everyone. But then, you know, we get to Winter Soldier and he's like, oh wait, maybe the government's not always on the side of everyone. So then that's where he has to kind of stand his ground and say like, hey, this is wrong. And that's where his own moral code is above the moral code of his government and his country, and he needs to fight for what he believes in rather than even in his country in that sense.
I also think as humble as he is, he can be prideful to say that he's his own moral compass, and yet that's not a problem. He's not prideful, and he just is, and everyone assumes he is, and he just does what he thinks is right, which usually is right. So you could attribute that to pride and saying, I know better than all of you, but because his heart is so accurate towards what is right and good, you usually don't worry about it. One of the big inspirations for this whole podcast was from a famous apologist named Frank Turek, who released a book called Hollywood Heroes and walked through why a lot of the superheroes in modern media and who have their own movies and all that are so popular, and how we can find the gospel message in their stories. That's kind of, this podcast was kind of a branch of that and pursuing that further, whereas that was just a one-off book for him. I wanted to explore that further in other movies, and that's why we have this podcast. But Frank Turek is an amazing apologist, and I really like that book. I love listening to all the podcasts he was on talking about that. He makes a lot of I say he makes a lot of the same points. I stole a lot of the same points that he had to show how we can use the character of Captain America to continue to talk to our friends about when in Endgame, when Cap is standing in front of the thousands, if not millions of bad guys that Thanos has gathered, ready to take them all on as one man. Why does that resonate with us? Why is he why is his willingness to sacrifice enact such an emotional response from us? Why does that feel like such an epic scene? And it's because the need for a savior is so great within our hearts, to want to be saved from this broken world, and to have a character who will always do what's right and always lay down his life before others. That he says that to Vision. He says, we don't trade lives here. He is willing to protect the ones who are more important. In that case, it was Vision who had the Mind Stone. Cap was ready to sacrifice himself to protect Vision, who wasn't even a person, but that sacrifice play. And I think we probably talked about this in the Iron Man episode. That resonates with us because we want to be saved from this fallen world. And when he does that, or at least his heart is pointed towards that, that's when not only do we understand it's a cool moment thematically and story-wise, but it's also talking to our spirits. It's a moment that is more spiritual than we realize, and those moments are the ones we need to be talking about.
Yeah, it's interesting that we talked about Daredevil a few weeks ago, because I think that what makes Daredevil great is that he's a complicated character in a complicated world. But I think what makes Captain America really interesting is that he's, a simple man in a complicated world.
Yeah.
Even though Daredevil's Matt Murdock's got this deep Catholic background, he will still choose his own way over the right way sometimes. I mean, just watch season 2. Captain America, he's always going to do what's right. Always. I mean, that's why we see him standing alone against Thanos and his full forces. And that's why we see him defending Bucky in Civil War. And that's why, even back to First Avenger, that's why we see him standing up to the bully before he even had the serum, because he's always going to do what's right. In the first Avengers movie, Coulson has this quote where, they're talking about his uniform, and he says,
everything that's happening, the things that are about to come to light, people might just need a little old-fashioned.
And I think that's Captain America altogether, is that he's old-fashioned and stands true to his values, and that's who he is. Yeah, and it might seem old-fashioned and outdated at points, but it's still like what he holds true to.
Old-fashioned isn't bad, but I think he also can fall back into old-fashioned is the only way. Not necessarily because he knows he's living in a new era, but I don't know. Even when it comes to like how churches operate and how a service should run, like you have the people who are hymns only, you have the people who are modern music only. Like neither is right or wrong. It's a mix. Like at least for me. That's my personal belief, is a mix is good. Yeah. And I don't think we should be offended when someone wants it the old-fashioned way and someone wants it the new way. And more times than not, it's not right or wrong to go one way or the other. But yeah, that's something that Cap brings to the Avengers, is the opposite of Tony, where Tony is up to date with everything and having the new technology and his Iron Man suit. And Cap is just, he's got his shield. It's trustworthy. His good old shield. And the friends we made along the way. Yeah, it's not bad. It's not for Tony. It's not, you can't write Tony's character to be like that. That's why you have Captain America. I want to ask, where does the Winter Soldier rank on your best Marvel movies?
Best, either 2 or 3, I would say.
Yeah. What's number 1? I'm curious.
Infinity War.
Oh, yeah. We need to talk about those. Why have we put that off for so long? I'll get that on the list. Yeah, Winter Soldier.
Where's it in yours?
I think it's probably 2, and I don't even know what number 1 is, but I feel like it's not quite a number 1. It's you bring up Infinity War because if I were to put that high, it'd be because it ends on a loss, and we can talk about that another time. But the Winter Soldier had a lot of good it had amazing fight choreography. I loved watching those fights, especially the hand-to-hand with Bucky. I wish it wasn't such a almost canon event that Bucky is the Winter Soldier, because then it would have been more of a surprise. And maybe it was for people who don't know the comics, but bringing him back is not wrong or bad. Actually, let's talk about that for a sec. Why is it okay to bring Bucky back from the dead after our fake out in a First Avenger, and not okay for other characters to come back from the dead? And I have my answer. I just want to see if you know it.
Wow, why is it okay to? Well, I think it's kind of what it does for Steve and his character, in a sense, that I don't even know where I'm going with this. Why is it? I just think, it provided an interesting storytelling element for Steve, just to have him see this dear friend of his being this assassin that he has to stop. It adds a lot of tension and conflict to his character.
Yeah, that was the whole point of the Winter Soldier movie. I would say it's okay to bring back a character like Bucky from the dead after, he fell off a cliff in the First Avenger, because that's the reality of that universe. The whole character of Captain America is he fought in World War II. He was frozen in ice, which somehow stopped him from aging, and he woke up in 2012 or whatever year it was. That is just something you're supposed to take as reality for them. That's part of their world building, where it doesn't happen that way here, and that's just one little tweak to their world that is different. And so then you can do the same for Bucky and say that Hydra found him, fixed him, froze him, and then brought him back to fight his equal, who isn't quite his equal because Bucky was brainwashed and Cap was not. But you get my point. It's because that's the reality of their universe. And yet it's also just not bringing someone back from the dead. Like right now, there were rumors that they were going to bring back Tony Stark and the original 6 for another Avengers film. I don't know what to believe anymore, because I also heard reports that those are false. Variety is a top-notch publisher, but why would they post that if they don't know it's true? But then Disney came out and said it wasn't true. I don't know. They can't just bring Tony Stark back from the dead. He is dead. No. Bucky was not dead. He was severely damaged. And because of this universe, like freezing time on these people to make them be in hypersleep, basically, that's the reality, not just bringing people back from, because Bucky didn't die. So it's
And I
it's
mean,
more of a actually of the world, and not just a thematic thing that they're playing. It's also
Yeah.
obviously happened in the comics, so it's not like they shouldn't do that.
And I mean, Bucky's sacrifice wasn't big and world altering either, which I think is kind of what the difference is. You know, we didn't see him over 10 years. Then he died and came back. You know, he died in his first movie and then came back. So I think there's kind of a difference there in how it played out. So
Yeah, I think it's surprising how much morality is talked about in the Captain America movies, and that has to do with his moral compass, his thinking about Civil War, and how some of the cooler lines that he has is not the quips during a fight. It's him sitting in that office, that complex, and talking it out with Tony. Those were cool, and yet because it shows his character even more, especially in this modern age of understanding that the government is trying to kind of control everything, blah blah blah, that talking point. And he also, which I don't know which movie, I think it was in just the Avengers movie, where he says,
The last time I was in Germany and saw a man standing above everybody else, we ended up disagreeing.
Because he has that context of World War II and the atrocities that happened then. He's seen it firsthand. It's not just a fact in a history book. And so he's again all for the right play, the good path. And that's why he understands that, I don't want to get too political, he understands that bigger government having more control over the things that individuals should have control over is bad. And he gets the individualism of the Avengers, even if they're a team and they have people working for them and their own individuality, like that needs to be kept intact for them to do what they do. It's just tough. I don't think Civil War gets enough credit, and it's good. It's kind of stupid that it's Avengers 2.5, but it has a lot of good commentary on can you trust these types of people with the powers that they have, or are they? I think they could have, if they knew what they were going to do with Wanda. And I don't really like everything about WandaVision and Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, but having her be on Team Cap and being on the good side with Cap arguing for individuality for the Avengers, then her playing into her storyline of eventually going rogue and being a villain with her powers and not being good like Cap does. I think that could have been interesting if they planned it out more.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, you know, going into Civil War, before like phase 2, you know, Captain America and his moral code kind of kept him close with the government, and Tony Stark's arrogance kind of kept him away from the government. Captain America sees what the government can do and what they want to do, and he says, oh, that's not right. So then he is more hesitant, and he decides against the Sokovia Accords in Civil War. And Iron Man, seeing what can be done with his suits and with his tech, in Iron Man 3 decides that there needs to be a bigger role from the government. So that's why he ultimately decides to be for the Sokovia Accords.
I guess we kind of already talked about his role in Infinity War, because there are a lot of people in Infinity War.
I feel like he doesn't actually do much in the Avengers movies. You know what I mean?
More or less. I would say in the first Avengers, you have that spat between Tony and Cap, where Thor is an alien, more or less. He doesn't know what's going on. Natasha just kind of stands there. And then Tony and Steve are in a yelling match, which is iconic. And yet Steve gets it. His line is,
big man in a suit of armor. Take that off. What are you?
Genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
I know guys with none of that worth 10 of you.
even though Tony responds with a quip, Cap understands that it's the man, it's the character behind the powers that make the hero.
And it was interesting to see Tony learn that in Iron Man 3 afterwards then.
Yeah, it does. Like, I think that's the arc of Iron Man 3 is no matter how many suits you have, no matter how many different things it can do, even though that was the cool part of Iron Man 3 of all the different variations of suits, it doesn't make you any better of a hero. It's who you are. That it's who you are outside of that construct that makes it attractive and who you are. Is it out of character for Cap at the end of Endgame to go and, however it happened, there is debates on how it happened and if it was actually follows the rules of the universe, to go and live a life with Peggy, because he's so selfless, and yet in that one moment he did his duty, he went and delivered the stones back. Again, however that happened, it happened off screen and doesn't work with the rules of the universe, but we're going to look over that. And then he goes and lives a whole life with Peggy. That's very selfish, but it's almost like he deserves to do that after a whole career of being selfless.
Captain America, Steve Rogers, lived a selfless life and then kind of ended it with a deserved selfish act.
Here's something that pertains to the future of the MCU, and we love talking about that here. It doesn't sit well with me that Sam is taking the mantle of Captain America.
Really?
Only because I don't think Captain America is a mantle to be passed to other people. I think Captain America is Steve Rogers as the person. Not to say that Sam isn't a good candidate if it was the mantle to be passed along. But I almost feel like it's a Robin Nightwing situation, I would say. I don't exactly know how that all worked, but how Nightwing became his own person and his own character and didn't continue to be Robin. And having Captain America 4 be about Sam and not Steve Rogers is interesting to me, only because I feel like that's how trilogies work, for one, as a technicality. And also, I just feel like the Captain America mantle belongs to Steve and can't be replicated with another person. Like, Sam is a good candidate. He's a good, quote unquote, good person, but also none of us are good. We're all sinners. But besides that, he doesn't have the same qualities as Steve. He can be Falcon with the Cap shield and the Cap branding, but I don't think he can be the second Captain America. Maybe I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong if I am.
Well, I think Steve saw in Sam what Erskine saw in him, which is ultimately a good man and not a perfect soldier. And I think that's kind of what Falcon and the Winter Soldier was about. I mean, Falcon and the Winter Soldier was okay. That's where I would put it. But, we do see Sam Wilson as this good man and John Walker as the perfect soldier, and we see why it's more important to have that good man in the role than the perfect soldier. So
I honestly forgot about that. I forgot about the Falcon and Winter Soldier because it was rebranded at the very end to Captain America or whatever the final credits were. But yeah, the John Walker character is obviously the good soldier. What would happen if the Captain America mantle had been given to somebody who looked the part? And that was almost scary because that was at that time, one of the most gruesome scenes we'd had from Marvel at that point, where Walker beat up a guy to death because he was angry and he wasn't a good man. He let his emotions take him. And that is why then Sam deserved the shield and the mantle. But I still don't think that is a costume piece or design that can just be passed around like the Robin outfit or like the name Robin in Batman's universe.
Well, the name Robin got passed around quite a bit.
That's what I'm saying, is that Robin was held by multiple different guys. And that's different than what I believe the Captain America character should be. And I'm willing to have somebody prove me wrong, but I think that's where I stand right now.
I don't want to say like just because the comics did it, it's right. But
yeah,
I don't know. I just think Sam Wilson, I would say he deserves it. He deserves that role as Captain America. I mean, it was Steve's choice to let him be Captain America.
For sure.
Like in the canon. But yeah, I think Captain or Steve Rogers still saw the need for a Captain America in the world. And, he was ready to hang up the shield, I guess. So he wanted to find someone to pass that on to, and he saw everything that he wanted in Sam.
Yeah, you make a good point that Steve saw in Sam what Erskine saw in Steve. I don't want to say that's 100% because Sam is a good person. I don't know that he's thrown himself on a grenade for someone else, and maybe that's just a lack of depth of the character that we haven't gotten yet, and maybe we'll get in. Probably not. I was about to say we might get it in Captain America 4, but unless Marvel makes it good, we never know. Probably not. They're gonna make it all about his skin color. But at least in the moment of watching Endgame, I think the final say in the Captain America Steve Rogers storyline was really, really wholesome, especially being the final thing you see at the end of Endgame, getting what he deserved, if you can call it deserved, is a beautiful moment. And understanding that he's been the good guy this whole time now, living for others, and now he gets to live for himself, I think is a great finish to the character, and especially seeing him as an old man, having completed his life and having loved taking this change to be his own man for a little bit, to focus on him and Becky. Very, very thematic and beautiful.
I guess kind of going back to what you were saying about, he is who he is on the inside. Whenever we see Steve Rogers introduce himself to someone, he always, he says, "I'm Steve Rogers. I'm the kid from Brooklyn." In Falcon and Winter Soldier, when John Walker introduces himself, it's always, "I'm Captain America. I'm Captain America." Steve, wherever he is and whatever he's doing, he's always still that kid from Brooklyn just trying to do what's right. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that's an interesting point to the man Steve was. The character John Walker felt that he needed to play, and the man that Steve sought in Sam. And I don't know what that is. I'm just going to leave it at that. But yes, John Walker thought that he could be Captain America by just wearing the suit and carrying the shield. And that's not how that worked. I think Falcon and Winter Soldier had a lot of good points when it came to the mantle of Captain America, especially when it got to the super soldier serum part, and it just amplifies what is already the core of what people are. And Walker was an angry man, and it just made him more angry. But yet Sam didn't take it. So it's not the super soldier serum or the shield that make you Cap. It's who you are. And I'm not saying we should learn from Steve Rogers what is good and what is bad. We should be learning that from the Bible. But from Jesus. But he seems to embody it pretty well. And yet he misses the mark. So many people will do good things, and even those good deeds are counted as dirty rags, just like the Bible says. And Steve can do good things for good reasons, but without God, it's meaningless. And I think that's the summation of this whole conversation about him. Is it's pointless without Christ at the center of it. Having evil to fight means that there is good. And if you know what's evil, the opposite of that is good. And that's what Captain America is supposed to embody. And yet it's also an argument for biblical truth, biblical justice, biblical righteousness, and the truth that is found in Jesus and his word.
These are just kind of some thoughts about kind of Sam Wilson in Phase 4. I think, in the Infinity Saga, we never went like 2 or 3 movies without seeing Steve Rogers, right? And I think
even if it's Loki changing into him for one scene.
Even if it's that, but we've only seen Sam Wilson once since Phase 4 started. And that was in his own show. I think we should have seen him more. I mean, they really should have given him the role that, Captain America is meant to have. I would even like to see him like pop up in like after credit scenes and like Shang-Chi and Moon Knight, trying to put together a new team of Avengers. But oh well.
I don't know. The future of Marvel is so whack. Let's save that for another episode. Thank you everybody so much for listening or watching. Be sure to follow us on all our socials, join our Discord, and share this podcast with your friends so we can get the word out about all the great conversations that go on here. Until next time, know that you are loved. God bless.
Merry Christmas.